How often have you found yourself in the following situation when you're driving or being driven in a car? It's 2:15 in the morning, you're tired, you're coming home from some engagement, and you're sitting at a red light wanting to turn left where you've been upwards of 5 minutes, and nothing has come from either direction. Who am I trying to kid? Doesn't have to be 2 in the morning. That can happen in the middle of the afternoon, as I'm sure you're well aware. Every time I go to Europe, I come back increasingly frustrated by this situation because over there, they've been much quicker to take advantage of what's becoming a widely recognized superior technological form. Now, we're not accustomed to thinking about things like traffic lights and four-way stop intersections as technological forms, but I think you'll agree that they do constitute part of our built environment. And so as you suggest, the innovation I want to talk about today is the roundabout. I want to tell you a little bit about them and why I believe they pertain to you. Before I do, however, I shall just quickly distinguish between roundabouts and traffic circles. When a driver approaches a traffic circle, they have to come to a complete stop, whereas roundabouts are governed by an operational principle. I just realized I've forgotten my thing here. Let's see. By an operational principle known as the yielded entry rule. Now that yielded entry rule and the modern roundabout originated in 1956 in the United Kingdom, and exactly 10 years later they had nationalized this yielded entry rule. By the early 1980s, roundabouts of various sizes began to proliferate throughout continental Europe, and by 1990, they'd finally reached the United States. And I don't have to tell you that that considerably amplified the roundabout revolution. Now, this revolution has touched our city as well, and the idea I want to advance today is that we should look for more of this, not just here in Hamilton, but elsewhere. Before we adopt a new technology, however, at either the individual or collective level, Neil Postman maintains that we ought to ask ourselves 3 important questions, which are as follows. 1, what is the problem to which this technology is the solution? 2, whose problem is it exactly? And 3, if there is a legitimate problem to be solved here, what new problems might be created by our using this technology? And I want to address each of these questions in turn. So the problem to which roundabouts are the solution is that so many of our intersections at the moment are inadequately governed by signals and stop signs. In fact, I'd say sometimes there's such an outrage to reason that I marvel we can continuously be associated with this high technology civilization. That's because roundabouts are superior by practically every measure of efficiency and efficacy, including safety, including capacity, time delays, cost, fuel efficiency, pollution, and even aesthetics. Now, in terms of safety, the features of roundabouts compel drivers to reduce speeds when they are approaching, entering, and moving through roundabouts. And this leads to dramatic reductions in accidents, because in contrast to roundabouts, as you know, green and amber lights promote aggressive driving, encouraging people to try and beat the light and traverse the intersection quickly. But the important thing is that accidents cannot very readily occur in roundabouts, and that is because one of their noteworthy features is that at their entries and exits you can only turn right, and that's typically induced by what's known as a splitter island. Accidents typically occur on left turns or intersections where traffic's moving perpendicularly. Roundabouts don't only reduce the frequency, but also the severity of accidents. And this pertains to both injuries and fatalities involving vehicles, cyclists, and other pedestrians. And I just want to point to some data here. This is 2014 data from the US Federal Highway Administration and Insurance Institute for Highway Study. And you can see here, overall collisions, a reduction in 37%, pedestrian collisions, reduction in 40%, injury collisions, a reduction of 75%, and in terms of fatality collisions, a reduction of 90%. Now, I think you'll agree that those are significant features, okay? Compared to signalized intersections or waiting for gaps in traffic at stop signs, roundabouts are also considerably more efficient at reducing delays, with one study I saw suggesting reductions of up to 89% in delays. I don't have to tell you what that means for your quality of life. Roundabouts increase capacity because of their much smoother traffic flow, with high volumes of left-turning vehicles much better able to maneuver. Even a one-lane roundabout permits in excess of 2,000 motorized vehicles and hundreds of mopeds and cyclists per hour. Added to that, they also reduce delays for pedestrians who, rather than have to wait for a signal, can cross with any safe gap in traffic. Now, if all that so far isn't enough to sway you to what I'm calling the roundabout revolution, after an initial, more costly outlay, they also become considerably less expensive over time. When you measure it over, say, 20 years or so. And that's because they eliminate the need for signals and thereby reduce the costs of hardware, maintenance, enforcement, and electricity to the tune of $5,000 to $10,000 US per year per roundabout. Add to this the significant savings we could bank by not requiring police officers to direct traffic during power outages, which, as you know, can be pretty lengthy here. And furthermore, we have to account for the tremendous public savings that would result by not having to dispatch emergency vehicles to all those accidents that we're no longer going to have, nor do we have to treat victims of so many traffic accidents in our hospitals. And that, of course, are savings that will result at the provincial and federal levels of our government. Reduced speeds create also reductions in fuel consumption. And roundabouts mean less idling, less pollution, improved air quality, and allow us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 60%, according to a study that the city conducted in conjunction with researchers from McMaster University. Now, the study observes that even modest reductions in greenhouse gas emissions significantly impact the environment. But a reduction on the magnitude of 60%, that amounts to a 84-ton reduction in annual greenhouse gases, the equivalent of taking 17.5 cars off the road per roundabout. Similarly, it translates into our using just under 40,000 liters less fuel per year per roundabout. Now, add to all that the fact that you don't need to have Vegas-style lighting from having traffic lights everywhere. That makes roundabouts more aesthetically pleasing as well, as does the reduced noise through the general reduction of speed. And this aesthetic quality is further augmented by the possibilities that the center islands of roundabouts afford for innovative landscape design, much more so than do the tended gardens that characterize our intersections at present. So I've discussed a number of ways in which roundabouts are a solution to certain problems presented primarily by signalized intersections. But to address Postman's second question, whose problems are these anyways? Well, if one rarely drives, I can sort of imagine that maybe some of these efficiencies might seem somewhat marginal. But I think it's quite obvious that we all socially benefit in some way from their safety, their fiscal, their aesthetic, their environmental, and their existential advantages. Therefore, if we agree that there is a problem to be solved here, what new problems might be created by our using roundabouts? And I've only really been able to discover one, and it sort of manifests itself as a kind of conflict between the American civil engineering communities and the visually impaired. And that's because when traffic stops at a signal, it creates an audible pattern of sound that informs people when it's safe to cross. With roundabouts, it's not so easy audibly to sense such safe gaps in traffic, and therefore potential problems of safety can be created for that community. We could install manual pedestrian signals at roundabouts. That would increase the costs of operations and construction. At the same time, it would also compromise some of the advantages I outlined earlier. So perhaps not in every case are roundabouts the answer in those circumstances. But to refocus on our city, Hamilton currently has 6 modern operational roundabouts. Has anybody used any of them? Aren't they great? Did you know that the one at Wilson and Meadowbrook in Ancaster, which was installed in 2002, was Ontario's first modern roundabout? How's that for innovation at the margins? But I recently spoke to Ron Gallo, who's the Senior Projects Manager for Signals and Systems at the City of Hamilton's Traffic and Engineering Operations, and a staunch advocate of roundabouts. And he was suggesting to me that despite the fact that he has put together a comprehensive 2008 report on the benefits of roundabouts to the city, and despite how the general enthusiasm with which they were received at that time, he suggests that the reality is that the initial financial burden has limited the use of roundabouts, except where those costs could be passed on to developers. Hence the reason why we only have innovation at the margins of our city, as that's where all the development is, right? But there are many intersections in our city which, when you consider the total social costs, would be much better converted into roundabouts. But who should pay the price for such conversions? Those who lose life, limb, or loved one to an accident? Those of us whose quality of life can be so much enhanced through less delays, less pollution, less climate instability? The fact is that we all have an interest in such changes, and as you know, not just as Hamiltonians, but as Ontarians, as Canadians, and as global villagers. Now, in that regard, Ontario has recently committed itself to endorsing roundabouts, with the MTO installing its first in 2009. With regards to things like signage, illumination, pavement markings, and traffic control devices, the MTO has brought out roundabout standards and guidelines for provincial highways and currently has in excess of 50 roundabouts in various stages of construction, development, and planning. As a result of their extraordinary success, roundabouts are now included in the MTO's design phase whenever possible. Now, the federal government has also significantly contributed to the development of roundabouts around the country. But I'd like to suggest that that could be more energetically pursued, and that it ought to be pursued in the form of a vast public works project. I think it would be very easy to get the insurance industries behind such a motivation, particularly as they've done so in other jurisdictions in the United States and in British Columbia. But how should it be paid for? Well, perhaps the imposition of a temporary carbon tax would be in order, in addition to continuing to fund them through the gas tax fund as we do now. But equally significantly, they should also be funded through interest-free loans or low-cost loans to our various levels of government through the Bank of Canada, a public institution that was used just in that way between the years 1935 and 1975, and which helped our country emerge from the Great Depression, get through World War II, and create much of the infrastructure that we associate with our post-war prosperity. So just to close, at the moment, our municipality is not yet Ontario's leading innovator when it comes to the implementation of roundabouts. That distinction instead belongs to the region of Waterloo. Now, as you know, they've got a well-deserved reputation for technological prowess. But if Canada had a national vision characterized by such technical sophistication, matched by a concern for the beneficial environment of services that accompanies it, we could nationalize that sensible vision and make it a reality like the British before us through our concerted efforts and actions. And the way that we have to do that, I would say, is through building bridges between our various levels of government, and, of course, including interested citizens, not least of which the visually impaired. That, I think, is what we have to do, and I say, let's make it happen. It's already begun. All we have to do is reinvigorate the process. But imagine this then. It's 2:15 in the morning, you're tired, you're coming home from some engagement, you effortlessly glide through a number of roundabouts, and before you know it, you're safely ensconced in your bed and safe at home. Thank you very much.